Això no és un institut, és una sala de la Biblioteca de Catalunya, que al capdavall va ser fundada per l'Institut d'Estudis Catalans. I he d'agrair també a la Biblioteca que ens hagin deixat la sala, perquè totes les sales de l'Institut estaven ocupades per un voluntaris. Bé, dit això, també en aquesta introducció a l'acte, mentre s'estan resolent problemes tècnics, en aquesta introducció vull esmentar els copatrocinadors o coorganitzadors d'aquesta cosa, que són, com sabeu, la càtedra, el CIEMEN, el GELA i l'Inguapats i l'Inguamont. No sé per quin ordre, però aquest. Aleshores, jo passo la paraula a la senyora Ivonne Grilli, directora de Política Lingüística de la Caritat de Catalunya, que farà la presentació del conferenciat.
De presidir aquest acte i de presentar el ponent. Jo li agraeixo especialment perquè de cara també al ponent, que tenim el gran privilegi de tenir-lo aquí, doncs la vostra presència demostra, per una banda, l'interès que teniu les persones que esteu estudiant, l'interès per la diversitat lingüística i també l'oportunitat que ell pugui conèixer aquest interès que té darrere vostra Catalunya i també pel fet que Catalunya, lògicament, és en ella mateixa un país de diversitat. De fet, la conferència que ens ha de fer avui porta per títol Ideologies de la diversitat lingüística i, com deia, nosaltres som un país de diversitat, som un país de diversitat en nosaltres mateixos, des del punt de vista identitari, territorial i propi de Catalunya. Tenim la nostra pròpia minoria territorial, que és l'occità, és l'aranès, que és una variant de l'occità. També tenim la nostra pròpia minoria simbòlica en la llengua de signes catalana i millor que nosaltres tampoc no coneixem què significa ser una llengua que en un moment determinat pot estar en perill, pot estar amenaçada. Igualment, com a país de diversitat, bé que som un país que sempre hem viscut en la diversitat de llengües, pel fet de ser un país d'acollida, amb la diversitat i l'alternança català-castellà, català-castellà-aranès i en aquest moment també en la diversitat de les 200 llengües i nacionalitats i models també de convivència lingüística que la gent que viu en aquest moment a Catalunya està acostumada. És gràcies precisament a les investigacions dels organismes coorganitzadors i gràcies a la feina que també el GELA, que possiblement teniu també més relació, doncs hi treballa des de fa molts anys, des del 92, que disposem també d'aquesta informació, podeu disposar i podeu fer estudis en aquest sentit i és gràcies també personalment a la Carme que podem disposar d'avui d'un conferenciant de luxe com el Matthias Brenzinger. De fet, ell és un africanista des del punt de vista cultural. Ell, lògicament, és conegut per les nombroses publicacions que té en l'àmbit de la diversitat de llengües a l'Àfrica, també per la difusió que ha pogut fer com a periodista, l'exercici de l'ofici en els mitjans de comunicació i, com a breu currículum, si per cas, que també el teniu a l'abast per diferents mitjans, però sí que podem dir que ha estat durant molts anys professor de la Universitat de Colònia. A partir del gener de l'any vinent també ho serà de la ciutat del Cap, a Sud-àfrica. Ha estat professor convidat de les universitats de Dartmouth, Kyoto, Botswana, Addis Abeba i també la de Tòquio, d'estudis estrangers. És especialista en processos de substitució lingüística en llengües africanes i ha fet treball de camp a Kènia, Tanzània, Etiòpia, Namíbia, Botswana. Així mateix codirigeix amb Akira Yamamoto el grup d'experts sobre llengües amenaçades de la UNESCO i és el coordinador per a l'Àfrica de l'Atles de les Llengües del Món en perill d'extinció de la UNESCO també. Des del 2006 és secretari general del World Congress of African Linguistics, membre del comitè editorial del Journal of Sociology of Language i és autor també, com deia, de diverses obres fonamentals per a l'estudi, sobretot de les llengües africanes i sobretot també d'aquelles llengües que estan en perill de mort o en perill de desaparició. La conferència que ens farà avui és precisament sobre ideologies de la diversitat lingüística i sense més passo la paraula al doctor Matthias Brenzinger. Moltes gràcies.
So I'm going to talk on Ideologies of Language Diversity. It's a bit strange, the title is a bit strange, and you see there this taxi is in June. I took this picture when I was in Addis Ababa teaching. So this is actually just next to the campus. There is a Kika campus outside of Addis Ababa. So this is just next to this campus, and you see there the script suite on this taxi, and you see the Amharic number plate. So in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, you see it's dominated by Amharic script, but you still see that for some purposes they use English, and I'm going to talk about diversity, ideologies of diversity, and the opposite. So language ideology, usually if there is no further explanation, language ideology means language nationalism. So when it's used without any further explanation, the standard language ideology is language nationalism. And I'm going to look into this ideology and the effect on the current distribution of language diversity on a worldwide scale, but I'll pick up two countries in Asia and then compare to the African situation, and also on the impact of language nationalism on the work at the UNESCO Atlas, which I experienced personally. So this is more sort of a theoretical frame I'm talking in, and then for the concrete, for the precise examples I'm going to mention, I'm talking about language ideologies of language diversity, and this is a bit weird because this is just the opposite of language ideology in a standard way, and I try to emphasize that also our own ideologies, I mean us as linguists working in the field, we have also ideologies on language diversity, should be reflected on. And the question I raise here is sustainability of language diversity. So I'm still working on that, and it's in progress. So I'm not sure whether it really is a valid notion. But there are three different aspects I'm going to mention in this talk. This is the importance of raising awareness and also recognizing languages which are endangered. This is the work done by UNESCO and others. Then language documentation, which is done by linguists, by us, and language documentation not in the sense of building up language museums, so storing information in some place in Europe, but really being involved with the communities and actively helping them to document their own languages. And then with regard to sustainability, one question which usually, I mean, we all assume that we know what's meant by having supporting communities in their efforts to revitalize languages, but in fact they are interested in quite different aspects of revitalization or fostering. So some communities are only interested in the symbolic use of their language, so they don't actually want to speak the language. They just want to have this as a symbolic, so they want to have linguists writing a grammar and a dictionary to put it somewhere and to show it, but they don't. But they are not interested in actually using these for actual work or for their own use. So and then there is a second request. I mean, other communities are interested in support on a local level and having oral performance transmitted to their children. And then you have a third request by some communities on having having the language officially supported, having a written form, and I'll show two examples of orthographies which I developed with community members on two languages. So this is the last stage of that. So language ideology, with any further specification, commonly refers to language nationalism. So this is like the English-only movement in the United States, and also the Herderian ideology of the 19th century Europe, which propagated nation-states of one people and one language. So this, in many contexts, also fascist movements. I'm not saying that the English-only movement is on the same level, but there is sort of a similar mindset. But anyhow, it's the nation-state. The ideology which is there is that you have one nation, one people, one language, and this ideology which spread in the 19th century and was one of the key instruments for nation building in Europe, made the states the natural enemy of language diversity. So the demise of smaller languages has often been seen as a collateral damage in this process. So they were just taken as given that these languages disappear when you have one dominant language empowered and these smaller ones just disappear. This has also been expressed by Nyerere for Tanzania when he introduced Swahili after independence to be their national official language of Tanzania. He also said that every good move has negative side effects, and the negative side effect of the spread of Swahili is that all these 120 Tanzanian languages are going to disappear. So he said this is something. So this is what I call collateral damage. So they say that this spread is an important move. So there are these small languages just going to disappear in this move, in this development. So their belief underlying this ideology is that homogeneity, linguistic homogeneity, is an ideal for a state, and this vision of monolingual nations being the ideal modern state spread also to many non-European languages from Europe, for example, Japan and Korea. Those two countries I'm going to discuss a bit later. One special case of language nationalism could be found in South Africa, where the apartheid regime used the nation-state ideology to designate homelands. So you had all those homelands of Zulu, all the different speech communities were forced into independent homelands, so-called independent homelands, which were not recognized by any outside country, but they were within South Africa. They were treated as separate nations. And this special case of language ideology, language nationalism, is also special because it didn't come from the people, so there was no ideology by Zulu and Xhosa to have their own homelands, but it was from outside, so they were forced into those homelands, and the ideology was actually the Afrikaans speakers. They wanted their homeland, so they forced all the others out of their homeland. So that's also a sort of a very special situation there. In a more general observation, language ideology reflect on moral, religious, social and political values, which then give rise to the particular mindset that underlie attitudes and judgments on language use, patterns, linguistic variation, and also on multilingualism. And this is where it comes in that we also have to reflect our own ideology when we work when we support multilingual settings. And this is what I expect all of you are going to do, or what you're aiming at in Catalonia, that you have a multilingual approach to society. because everything else is, like I said here, everything else is out of place and unrealistic. Speakers of different languages or dialects may share certain cultural practices, beliefs, or value systems. Thus, speech communities may be regarded as organizations of linguistic diversity, with language ideologies providing that organization. So this is my use of language ideologies. So it's a wider use, and in the widest sense, it also reflects on our ideologies, on our documentation campaigns by linguists, on activist approaches in revitalization efforts, and on ideologies by the speakers themselves. There will be, I mean, all this is blah blah maybe, so I hope that there is some examples and some sort of real information in my talk, which is coming up now, to fill in what I mean by all that. So national coverage of replacing languages. In most developed countries, the persistent long-term language nationalism, combined with the spread of English as a global lingua franca, is said to bring up one common multilingual regime, namely the national dominant language as mother tongue of all citizens plus English. So this is what we observe worldwide as a trend which we have to cope with and to deal with. In Africa, there are very, very few countries where language nationalism has been practiced or implemented, and they were rather unsuccessful in implementing this language ideology. The reason is that there is the colonial burden of imposed, largely arbitrary borders, the linguistically heterogeneous settings, the occurrence of widespread multilingualism, and all these prevented that linguism expanded to a national level. One of the political reasons is that the British colonial policy of Dignité Impera empowered the strong dominant ethnic groups in their territories, and to break up national concentrations of power. So they had small units which they can use and play with, and this policy after independence still sort of had an effect that the other ethnic groups who were ignored and suffered from this dominance of the dominant groups were suspicious. So any attempt of those major groups to extend their territory was stopped. So there was a quite violent, very often violent riots against those attempts of dominant groups to dominate the country. So this is now the background of the threat to language diversity on the African continent. So in Africa you have more than 2,000 languages spoken. So that's 1/3 of the languages in the world are spoken on the African continent. So the reason for this diversity, not only the number is high, but also it has the highest typological variation of languages. The reason is for the presence of all those languages still is poverty and marginalization. That's one of the main reasons. So people are kept out of national developments, so they were kept out of privileges, and for that reason they had to survive on subsistence economy, which means we have small ethnic communities, and the ethnic language is the core, the marker of ethnic identity. So in order to survive physically, you had to speak your own language in order to be an accepted member of this community. And this way, we have all these more than 2,000 languages still there. Now, the threat to this diversity is so far, by African languages. So African languages in Africa replace African languages. This is a common pattern. And that means, because the loss of mother tongue speakers in one language means the gain of mother tongue speakers in another, except for those cases where people get killed, which is also happening in, or happened in some African countries, like in Sudan. Entire communities were wiped out in the Nuba Mountains, and you know about the violent situation in Darfur. But in general, it's African languages replacing African languages. Now, I'm talking about ideologies. When we look at the speakers themselves, one of the problems is that when we what we experience as linguists, when we work with communities, very often they accept the stereotypes and the ideology which came from outside. So the young generation feels like being modern and westernized, so they don't respect the older generation and also the culture, so they think they are backward. So this old man is one of the last rememberers of Yaku, a language which is extinct, but in 1990 there were still a few elders who remembered some of the phrases, and I worked with this old man for several weeks documenting the plant names. So he still knew 400 plant names, because the language which they shifted to is from the lowland, and these people live on the highland, so the plant names were retained because there were no other names to take over. So for that reason, he still had quite an elaborate knowledge on that. But exactly when I took this picture, there was this young grandchild, and he said, those cave people, you know, so, and he got really mad about that. So you see that they were accepting the European or outsiders' view on their own culture and generation, and this is one of the main problems in working with small communities. So this is their negative effect of modernity, and it's important to deal with these modern contexts. And it's incredible that even in this place, this is Akau, in one of the most remote, it's really a real remote area in Botswana, so there is no electricity, but still you have cell phone coverage in this village. So they have no electricity, so they have a solar panel and a battery and to recharge their mobile phone. And they have airtime, and you see them. So, and this is a very important thing for language revitalization, because now all those people who move to the cities or work somewhere else and they are isolated, they correspond or they communicate with the people in the village and maintain the contacts and also fluency in the language, because they talk quite a lot on those phones and it's not too expensive. So when we talk about communities, you will see later on pictures of one community where there are only 170 speakers left. You see, so it's really important to have each single member connected and not to be lost if you want to keep this diversity, which is what most of us support. Then another strange thing is that when you work with those last speakers of languages, they very often are completely ignorant that their language is going to disappear. So this Ongota, there are 8 speakers, so these are 2 of 8 speakers of Ongota. And when I ask them what they think about the language being lost, they say, how should it get lost? We have this language, why should it get lost? They said, because you have only 8. So it's also sometimes interesting to see the perception on that, so letting the sort of, or having a completely different idea on what's happening. So these 2 speakers, these 8 speakers are within a community of about 100 Ongota, and this Ongota, all the others already shifted to Tsamai completely, and also these 8 speak Tsamai as their first language. So it's just that they remember some of the Ongota. And you see this sort of repertoire of their languages. All these languages are spoken by their community members. So they all speak Gawada, Hamarbana, Konso, Afan Oromo, Amharic, and 2 of them speak even English. And you see that complex language repertoires in Africa is important to keep in mind when we talk about language diversity. And what is happening now, I said that African languages replace African languages, and it's sort of like when you have this onion diagram. It starts from the center, and the next language is the most likely new mother tongue if there is a language shift. And so this is happening now. So there are only these 8 Angota, and all the others are already with the Tsamai. But Tsamai itself is also threatened, and they move to Gawada. You see, so there is like a threat in stages, and this is quite different. And this is also the replacing languages. Now we looked at the replaced languages. Now the replacing languages are on different levels. So some of them are only local, neighboring language, replacing neighboring languages. Then you have some on a provincial level, some on a national level, some on international level. So this is quite different from most language shift settings in the world. Because the dominant language shift setting is the national context. So this example here in red is Japanese, and this could also be German with Sorbing, and any other of those nation states where you have one dominant language and all the minority language or small languages are threatened by this dominant language. So this is the most common pattern of setting. Now I mentioned raising awareness and granting recognition. So I work with this UNESCO Atlas of the world's languages in danger, and there is also a Spanish edition which Carmen didn't know. So it's obviously not very popular. Anyhow, so it looks like that. So there are all these languages are marked on a map, and this is one of the languages. This is one of the speakers of one of the languages. A Kwegu, there are only 200 of them, and this is a Shabo speaker. The community is only 800. So those languages are on that map. And now this whole discussion about raising awareness. There is one thing which I always attack, and this is the connotation of biodiversity, connecting biodiversity and cultural diversity, because I think they are completely different things. There are correlations of butterflies, many different butterflies and languages, but so what? And I think we deal with completely different issues here, and it's important to keep them separate, because natural and intellectual capital is completely different. I still feel that even though biodiversity is obviously decreasing, I still hope that intellectual capital is increasing. So I don't really follow this sort of biodiversity discussion. And now coming to the part which linguists are involved, language documentation, and this should be in a cooperative exercise. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the publications of Lenore Grenoble. She wrote this book, Saving Languages. So there are strategies on how to support community efforts on, and this is the picture which is on the front of that book. So even though there is not a single word on Africa, she took my picture there. I don't really know why, but so it's on supporting community efforts in documentation. And one of their interests of communities is to have their own orthography. And this is very often not for practical purposes, but it's important for their self-esteem. So if the language is written, sometimes, we introduced an alphabet in a 3-day workshop in September 1996 for Quedam. And they also changed the spelling of their language. So this is the old spelling. So now it's KHWE. So this is a very important point in time, and they said, I mean, several of them, they told me, now we know that we speak a language. So it's very often this idea of a language is only a language if there is, if it's written. Yeah? Oh, I don't know why. Present from the picture. It's yeah. It says from this picture.
F5. F5.
Okay. Oh, this is now. It's too far, I think. Can I go back? Okay. So we introduced this orthography in 1996, and it's now maybe there are maybe 100 who are able to read and write their language, but this is their educational. It's cut a bit, but it's for the official election in Namibia for the state election. They translated their poster also in Kwela for 100 people. So they are really using that language. And in April, there was another community in Botswana. They asked for having the language in a written form. And this is how it looks like. So this is the alphabets which we developed with the community. And you see the click sounds, because these are Khoisan languages. And you see the click sounds, they are actually the most important part to discuss with them, like this Tsaba and Khao, and they have these different click sounds. So in those languages there are about 27. And I will end, the last part which I'm going to talk is now on the ideology, the language ideology, then language nationalism, which has also effects still today on the work with UNESCO, because as you know, UNESCO relies on the acceptance by the member states. So when you publish something, you have to be careful not to get in trouble with that. So, and in Japan, there used to be, I mean, it's still till today there is very strong language nationalism. So the image of Japanese is that there is one language, Japanese, in this country. When in 2003, when the Ryukyuan languages were introduced or were accepted by UNESCO, by the Red Book, as endangered, and it was published, there were big discussions. I mean, it was a big thing in Japan that they discovered suddenly that it was not a monolingual country. And they said, we have languages, and it was a big surprise. And it was a long-term suppression. I mean, they were colonized. The Ryukyuan islands are this Okinawa. Okinawa is the former Ryukyuan kingdom. And there are 6 languages spoken on those completely distinct languages, which were downgraded to dialects. And for that reason, nobody was aware of that. And then the second language, and then of course, in Japan, it started with Ainu being officially recognized. So there are 2 fluent Ainu speakers still. That's what the claim is. And this couple, which got married, so I was invited to the marriage, the wedding party. So the couple in the middle, they are the woman is Japanese, but she speaks Ainu. So she both studied Ainu at university, and they plan to have their children grown up. They want to have the children grown up with Ainu as the first language. But it's a rather artificial thing, but they are very serious about that, so I'm not sure if they succeed. And these are now There are languages which are recognized by UNESCO and which caused quite a big discussion in Japan, and UNESCO got quite a lot of pressure on that. And even more, and when we talk about this Okinawan situation, we have to keep in mind that it's Japan, of course. So there are not people in not like in the villages in Africa. They are Japanese, and there is also a big cultural movement from Okinawa and in Hawaii. So this picture was done, I took in Hawaii. So there is a very big Okinawan community, and they're well organized. So there are 40,000 members of the Okinawan society. We invited me there to talk about Okinawa, and they don't speak the language anymore, even though they are really very serious about their culture. They don't speak the language anymore. And Byron Feature, who is on the left, the thin guy, he is fluent in Ujinaguchi, which is one of the Ryukyuan languages. So he was really upset, and he was shouting at them and saying, "You should learn," and whatever. So, the last example which I want to mention, which I suffered for 1 year, I had to fight with UNESCO to have Jeju being accepted as an endangered language, even though the official policy in Korea has changed. So about 5 years ago, they started a more liberal policy on language and diversity. So they officially use Go, which is language in Korean, but in English translation they always use dialect. So the UNESCO said we don't take dialects, and for that reason they ignored this language, and in fact it's a completely separate language spoken by about 5,000 to 10,000 people, all very old people. And there is now this Institute for Korean Language Studies at the Jeju University, who is studying this language and documenting. So, and the reason for ignoring this language by UNESCO was that the fear of language nationalism in Korea, which was not there anymore. And when I finally managed to convince them, they were quite positive reactions also from Korea, from South Korea, and of course from Jeju. So I received a letter from the governor from the self-governing province of Jeju Island saying that he appreciated the support and whatever. So the last thing I want to mention is that even languages which were extinct, like Hawaiian, could be reversed. So I mentioned this couple with the Ainu. So something similar happened in Hawaii. About 40 years ago, there were hardly any speakers except for one island, this Nihao Island, where there are still speakers. Unbroken. There is an unbroken chain of transmission in this island, but these people are cowboys, and they don't share the Hawaiian culture, even though they speak Hawaiian. The Hawaiian culture, which is very much centered on Taro, all the religious beliefs, were not transmitted in this island because it's a privately owned island and it's a farm, basically. And so the reinvention of Hawaiian was done by this person, Larry Kimura. So he is the hero of Hawaiian. And so 30 years ago he started, he used Hawaiian all the time in radio, so he had a radio program and he started propagating Hawaiian. And then about 30 years ago, Pilar Wilson and his wife and 7 other families decided to speak only Hawaiian to their children. And so they are the first new native speakers of Hawaiian. And this Hawaiian is sort of Larry Kimura's Hawaiian. So it's one person initiating that. And you have now Hawaiian emergent schools. You have 12 schools on Hilo, on the Big Island. And they're using, even preschools, they're using exclusively Hawaiian. And at school, you have Hawaiian only the first 5 years, and English is introduced in grade 6 as a second language. So they are really very strict in that. And so these are the high school, and we even at university, so Pilar Wilson is the head of the department of the Hawaiian department. So when I was there in October, they had the first defense of a PhD in Hawaii. So everything was up to PhD. You can now, and this is in United States with a very, very strong, dominance of English, of course. So even though the study of language ideologies are crucial for the understanding of dynamics, and I hope I have shown that, it became clear in this presentation, I think we still have to focus on their planning of multilingual environments and the implementation strategies more than, this is the core of all activities, and ideologies have to be reflected in these activities and planning efforts. And that's it.
Per què el món gasta un munt de diners per salvar una papallona i no en gasta cap per salvar una llengua?
Yeah, but this is the ideology that most governments still feel that diversity is a threat. And it's only recently that even in African countries that they understand that linguistic diversity is a pressure. And countries, but I still don't understand the whole dynamics of these policies. They're really complicated because you have countries which are dictatorships. Actually, there are, like Ethiopia and Eritrea are they don't have a democratic culture anymore, and still they have the most liberal language policy. So I really don't understand these sort of dynamics, and when we talk about, I said language planning and maintenance activities are important to keep language diversity. Many activities are, you can't predict, like in Kenya, Swahili was, they were trying to promote Swahili in the 70s, and in 73 they officially declared Swahili as also a language in parliament, so parliamentarians were able to speak Swahili in the parliament, and nobody did, because if you were there to use Swahili, you show that you don't speak English well. So there was had no effect at all. So they had different strategies, or they tried different strategies, and nothing worked. And then about 10 years ago, without even thinking of the implication, they changed for introducing university. You could, before that, you had to pass, or you had to have the points or the credits in English. And then they changed the policy and they said you could either take English or Swahili. And that had a major impact. And it resulted, the final result is that last year the government officially now changed their constitution, and English and Kiswahili are now official languages, and Swahili is the national language of Kenya. And I always told my students that this is the case in Tanzania, and then I found that in the constitution it's not there. You see, so it's in Tanzania. I always thought that this is in the constitution, but it's not there. It's always declared, but it was not in the constitution. But in Kenya it is. So, and I'm sure that this decision was not. They didn't think about the impact of this decision. And if you compare the situation of Swahili with that in Uganda, you see that Swahili has a very negative reputation, because it's the army, the language of the army and of the police. So all their training, everything is done in Swahili in their army and police. So if you speak Swahili in public, people think you are either soldier, police, or a relative to those people. So and nobody wants to associate it with them if you're not part of that. And so this is a very negative, and it hinders the spread of Swahili. But the music industry, modern music, hip hop, and also all these modern African music, it was down. You know, the music industry was down in Uganda, and some years ago it came back again, and now Ugandan music is very popular all over Africa. So they have very well received artists, and because of this Pan-African success of music, young people start suddenly also speaking Swahili and change their attitude even in Uganda. So these dynamics, it would be nice to plan, but the dynamics are really difficult to predict. So investing money not always would help to foster diversity. It means, you have to deal with these ideological mindsets.
Maybe there is something behind this question, and is I think that people who shift to a language, these people still speak. They don't remain silent forever. They speak another thing, and so and the butterfly probably is not the same case. So since you can speak another language is not the main issue to take care of.
You said at the beginning that linguists have language ideology. Could you explain exactly what that language ideology would be?
We all have different ideologies.
Different ones,
and so Peter Ladefogel, the late Peter Ladefogel, I don't know whether he came to Barcelona, I don't know, because he was traveling a lot. So he's the person who wrote this book, The Voices of the World, and he also, that's one of the last things he did was he created the language of the cannibals in Pirates of the Caribbean 2. So he was but he was one of the well-known linguists in the world, and he said, if people decide to give up their language, so what? Let them give up. So it's not our business. Just record what you. So that was his ideology. So for us, we think that diversity is important, and that it's a precious thing to have this cultural. For us, it's like some people like classical music, and they would support classical music, and so. I'm supporting those communities, keeping the small languages, and I tell them that it's important. So this is what I mean with our ideology. So we have to reflect on that. Other people might have different ideas on that, and of course, if you don't have anything to eat, then you have more serious problems than your language. And that's actually what happens in Africa, that people very often shift to other languages because there is no, it's really a matter of surviving. Also identity, the small communities are very often threatened, physically threatened. And some of these groups are quite big, like the Ongoni people in Nigeria. There are 500,000 people, but they are threatened because they dared to fight Shell, the oil company, and then they had real big problems and they were killed. And Kenza Oliva, one of the leading figures, was openly, he was killed in public by the government, and nobody took action. So you see, this is the situation in Africa, that you have very serious problems, and very often language is part of this problem. So if people decide to get rid of their language in order to survive, then we also have to be careful not to get into that.
There is no question over there.
What's your perspective of the future of the languages?
For the perspective of the world's diversity or the languages. It's very difficult to say, but in Africa we still have these 2,000 languages. So I guess that there are about up to 300. I would suggest are going to disappear within the next 20-25 years. So they are gone for sure. But then you have revival movements like in Hawaii, which you would never have expected. And in Hawaii you have now thousands of speakers, new speakers of Hawaiian, and they are like, it's almost like a sect, you know. And if you go to their department of Hawaiian in Hilo campus, even the secretaries, everybody is using, even the technician. You know, when I gave the presentation, we also had some problems in the computer, so they called the technician, and there was not a single English word. You know, so it's really irritating. And so they sort of, but the Hawaiian case is quite special, and because there is so much English dominance, they are really strict. So they didn't laugh when I said if they beat children when they speak English, you see. So they didn't laugh. Probably they are not allowed to beat, but they would like to, probably. So they are very, very serious. And you are forced to speak Hawaiian when you are in this group. If you meet a Hawaiian, you have to speak Hawaiian. No matter if other people are around, it's a rule. So it's a network, and if you meet someone in a kiosk somewhere, you speak Hawaiian to them. And that's how it works. And this is the only way, this is why it's such a success story, and it's not easy to copy. So when it comes to language diversity as a whole, you see that many of those 300 languages which are disappear are very important languages for linguists, because they are completely diverse languages. You know, some of them are the last languages of branches or families. So this is really a serious
You said in your work in Africa, mostly you have found that it's African languages that eat up other African languages. But in your work as a whole, have you found any connection between the endangerment of the local languages and the international use of English?
Yeah, I always thought that English is not a threat because English is a threat because in 60 or more than 60 countries in the world, English is also the official dominant language. So in the national, I think the replacement takes place in national context. So because there is the educational system is national, so the medium of instruction is the national language. So English is replacing many languages because it's official language in more than 60 countries. And it's used in education but it's not because it's spreading as a global language. Because as a global language, you acquire this as additional language. So in the global spread, I think it can actually help small languages. Like the Kwe, they're one of the Khoisan speaking communities I work with since 1996. UNESCO started 4 kindergartens in that, and so they really live in a remote area in a national park, and they are surrounded by Bantu-speaking people who are dominating them, and so many of them shifted to Bantu languages. So they gave up, in the past, they gave up their own language in favor of the neighboring Bantu languages. Now these 4 kindergartens, which are sponsored or initiated and also run by UNESCO, they use English and Kweda. They use their own language and English. And I realized that this is a very efficient way of keeping the Bantu languages away. So those languages, those children, they will progress in school because the official language at a higher level is English, and they will not shift to English as a mother tongue because there is a cultural barrier, and so. But when you look at situation in Europe, like in Germany, you have the Sorbic speech, the Sorbic minority. There are about 25,000 speakers of Sorbic, which is only spoken in Germany. It's a minority language, and there Sorbic is taught at school as a subject. And the choice is you either choose English or Sorbic, and then children choose English. And the same thing also happened in France with Breton. When I was there, they decided that the son of one of the activists I visited, he was really a Breton activist. The son decided to choose German because there were many German tourists. So he said it's better to choose German and to learn German than Breton. So,
for your interest, that's happening also in Spain, where in the Valencian community the government is promoting English language education as against Catalan language education.
Això és de tercer cicle, jo no m'hi ficaria. Perdona, hi ha una altra pregunta.
I'm interested in, based on your experiences, how would you actually define an endangered language? Does it only happen when there are only 10 speakers left, or does it start a lot earlier? And then also being here in Catalonia, I would be interested in knowing, like, what do you think about Catalan? How would you categorize the situation of the Catalan language?
I think in my presentation you already saw that the situation of speech communities or of these communities speaking endangered languages is very different. So I mentioned that there is worldwide dominance of national contexts for language shifts. So these contexts are completely different to those found in Africa. So it's very difficult to speak about endangered languages without defining the specifics. But I think that it really doesn't, it's not important. I mean, you have we worked with the UNESCO. We have these 9 factors identified which should be looked at if you have a language and you consider this language as endangered. You have a catalog of 9 factors, and you look at those, and some, like with a small number of speakers, is one of the factors, but it's not the only one. You may have large communities with their 50,000 speakers still, and still this language is more threatened than a language spoken by 800 people like the Hadza. In Tanzania, it's 860 people, and they all speak the language. So you have a very small number of speakers, but everybody speaks the language. And you have large speech communities like the Saramo, where you have 200,000 people and 50,000 of them speak the language. But it indicates, that it's old people speaking the language. So you have a large number, but still, and also there is situation like forced migration, forced resettlement, and so political pressure from outside might cause that language which was safe might be endangered. And then you have languages like I just read yesterday on this. What is that? Kalalit, or what is that language spoken in Greenland? Kalalit. Yeah. So I only heard the pronunciation of Lenore Grenoble. She works there, and she pronounced like a lateral fricative or something. Kalalit or something. Yeah. So this is now officially recognized, and so she says that this language is not endangered, and it's a small language, but because of the recognition of Danish. I mean, their semi-autonomy, their language is now official language next to Danish, So this political situation has changed, and she claims that this language is now safe, but we don't know. It's dynamics, you know, there are dynamics, so there are processes. You can't say this is now safe. People feel that in Germany, you have all these German professors, they think Germany is highly endangered. So I sometimes have a hard time, and they say in Africa I shouldn't emphasize those small languages, and I shouldn't encourage them. They should learn useful languages like German. So there, and we have, of course, we have to get rid of those language chauvinist statements on language endangerment, because they are not, of course, not endangered.
Yeah, I think in Europe we have an interesting case, which is the reality in Ireland, because reality is just a small thing, but I think just a few thousand people, and it has a state behind it. It's an official language in Ireland, and people tend to use more English than Gaelic. So I don't know if to have a state, to have a nation, to have a government backing a language, it's enough to say free, because it seems that the case of Gaelic is really classified as a language in danger too. Just a point of reflection, because some people tend to think that to have a state, to have a government backing the language, it's a necessary condition to make it survive.
Yeah, the other way around works better. You know, I mean, governments can suppress languages it's easier. You know, like I think Coptic became extinct because of the text. You know, they introduced a text for Christians. So when you were a Christian, you had to pay a special tax, and so they stopped speaking Coptic, not to pay the tax. So this seems to work much better than the other way around, like with Irish, where you get tax reduction if you speak Irish. So you have to have this examen, and then, which I heard is very easy, and then you pay less tax. But obviously it doesn't really work to help to promote the language.
I would like to ask you if you expect in your studies to find some universals. Do you know language universals?
What about?
In all your studies of hidden languages, you are recognizing the structures of the minority languages. In your studies, do you recognize some universals through the whole languages?
What type of universals you're...
There are many models of universals, not only semantics, but morphological and all sorts syntactic. And I was thinking about this old concept about this meta-universal language. I don't believe in sort of thing like that, but something has been defended many years by generativism. So
yeah, no, I'm a documentary linguist, so I work with languages, so I'm not into this theory. So I really like languages, so not this sort of funny trees and stuff. So I really think with those minority languages I work with, they are Khoisan languages. So there are 2 Khoisan languages I work with. So they are I don't know what I can say about universal.
But you don't understand my question, even if you are not able to answer.
No, I'm not.
Okay. But for example, in semantics, you have a glossary, you are not giving for the divide the languages, even designing alphabets, and you know what kind of words are still alive. So maybe you can find a commune-like motif for this sort of lexical units.
You see, the problem is, I mean, I work on many small languages in Ethiopia and other parts of Africa, and usually you start with word lists and you ask them, I mean, in a language which is sort of like in East Africa, it's Swahili, and then you work on another language, so you ask them for terms like animal and stuff like that. So the basic vocabulary, and even the most basic vocabulary you find, like the que, for example, I found that you are imposing meanings because they will respond something, and then you, after years, you see that your translation is wrong because the concept behind is completely different. For example, the que, they don't have a term for animal. They have a name, they have a word for food, for meat, and this term they use when you ask them what's your term for animal, they will say meat. But then when you ask, is lion meat, they say no, we don't eat. You see? So it's obvious that it's not. So, but these sort of things are really complicated, and it takes years to discover those concepts. And it's only when you have when you speak the language and you have a lot of recordings of natural conversation, this is when you find out about those specific uses and yeah.
Thank you for the lecture, because I feel that we have heard about linguistic ideologies, which is not a very common topic that is brought up when we speak about language diversity, and I think that language diversity includes not only languages but these ideologies. And I was wondering if you, when you have incorporated with UNESCO projects or revitalization projects, have you noticed if language ideologies is something that is neglected to some point? If there is actually a kind of neutral linguistic ideology that is taken for granted from the perspective of revitalization projects. The one that is supposed that the model of European nation states.
I mean, UNESCO has not a neutral language ideology because they have to be careful not to offend national governments. So they don't have any clear position. So they have to listen to what governments say, you know, and then.
But they are aware of the fact that there are different language ideologies that they are neglecting when they are trying to protect linguistic diversity.
Yeah, the main approach is that diversity is something, cultural and linguistic diversity should be promoted, and this is a very important positive thing about UNESCO, and this is the important role it plays. And so this ideology dimension is more a hindrance in special cases or special government settings. So, but the general attitude or general position ideology of UNESCO is that diversity is something to be promoted and to be supported. So that's, I mean, otherwise I would not support and work with UNESCO.
However, they use more the term cultural diversity, more than linguistic diversity. I never heard linguistic diversity in UNESCO. I never heard. After all, you can speak any language in the UNESCO, always this language is French.
Hi ha una altra pregunta.
Preserving languages, and languages, I think that the day will arrive where we will have, our successors will have the knowledge or the technologies to study and link languages that now we think are isolated. And the same way that using DNA, they are now linking peoples, they are studying the evolution of monkey, the day will arrive that we will need those dialect languages to document the evolution about if all men come from a single For this reason, I think that UNESCO or other institutions should preserve even those languages that their speakers will not or will like not to speak more. We can now take the DNA of someone died 1,000 years ago, but we cannot document oral languages that died last week. We cannot document Dalmatian. And this, I think that this is a duty of our generation to preserve all this information.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that like the old man on the picture where I said that the grandson said these cave people. So there is now a teacher in this village. It's called Toltol, this village. And there is a teacher, and she is now, she wrote to me and she said I should send her all the material on the Yaku language because she wants to revive the language. But there is only a grammatical sketch of this from the 70s on this language, and then there is a vocabulary which I collected on plants. So you can't revive a language based on these few notes, you see. So that's too late. For some languages it's too late, and for those where you have old people, you're right, you have to work and document those languages. Like in South Africa there is a language called Zulu, one of the Khoisan languages, and there are only 7 speakers left, and only 3 of them are really sort of fluent, still fluent. And there are now serious efforts in documenting this language with them. And one of these old women even started teaching, and there I saw a YouTube video, a small YouTube clip with the old lady teaching children the new language. But it's rather, and this is it's a completely distant language. So it's the last remnant of a family, language family, and so with these 7 speakers, there is even a special sound which is going to be lost forever. It's a click. It's one of the clicks. It's a kiss click. So there, the symbol with a circle and a dot in. So it's like this. So it's important to keep this and to record. And we use video and all modern techniques to document.